The following is an excerpt from a longer conversation between my son and I, in this case talking about what news sources you would consider legitimate. Enjoy.
If the New York Times is owned by a parent company, GE, and that company underneath it owns another smaller company, and there's just an umbrella of companies underneath the parent company that owns the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is the New York Times going to be unbiased in articles that it prints or that it sells to the public about certain companies that might be included in that umbrella? You have to ask yourself that question. Is there going to be any bias whatsoever, or is there going to be even necessarily a push towards the back of the paper, or perhaps limiting of information?
Well, there's a lot of
And
decisions that have to be made by a newspaper, like what things to cover and how to cover them and where to put them in the paper. So there's a lot of decisions,
absolutely,
and they could be influenced in a lot of ways. And somebody could make a phone call and say, "Hey, bury that story." That's totally possible. I don't know if it happens. Probably happens, at least with some newspapers.
right. And there's even there's even so when it was, when we didn't have the technology that we have today, the internet, the ability to spread news as fast as possible. These major ones, this is back in the 70s, 60s, and stuff like that. These major newspapers would send a printed sort of bullet point copy of the newspaper articles that they were going to be printing that day to lower local newspapers, right? So the New York Times would send basically a telegram of the articles that they were going to be printing in the next day's paper, so that those newspapers knew what was worthy of the New York Times. And so it would almost be echoed through the local governments as well.
Mm-hmm. You mean local
Right? The
paper?
local papers, right? The
Yeah.
local papers would get the major papers what they were going to be running the next day, so that they had a little bit of a jump, and so that their, a newspaper is worthless the next day, right? So they had
Yeah.
had a little bit of a one up on that. So you have to ask the legitimate source, and what is it? And I want you to tell me what you think it is.
What I think a legitimate source is?
Well, what do you think makes a legitimate source, and what would differentiate a legitimate source from a less legitimate source?
Just for the source, I would say it would be something that has proven to be trustworthy. So they very rarely get something wrong or are caught in a lie.
Okay.
That would be the more trustworthy sources, and ones that you have no track record because they're brand new, or that are clearly biased and are often distorted. Those would be less trustworthy.
Okay. So the less trustworthy description that you just said, I think would apply to pretty much every major news channel out there.
So the New York Times lies.
The New York Times lies. ABC News lies. NBC.
Can you tell me a lie
They
that the New York Times did?
Sure. One of the more recent ones, which was interesting, which has been spreading around the internet, is that, and I believe it was MSNBC or CNN. They ran a news segment using footage from an Italian hospital when they were talking about a New York hospital. And this was proven that it was footage of a full scrambling Italian hospital. And the segment wasn't about an Italian hospital, it was about a New York hospital.
And this was CNN
And
that
they
did
got,
this.
and this was CNN or MSNBC, I can't remember which.
Okay.
But they did it twice, and they got caught twice doing it. And And then what happens? So what happens now when a news station, especially these major ones where there's a lot more eyeballs on them, a lot more fact checkers, what happens is they'll run an article and they don't fact check. They don't really do the due diligence now because the news cycle has gone so millisecond, breaking news constantly, that they don't even have time to check this stuff out. You know, they just
I
run the
don't know if
article
that's
and then,
true.
well, okay, maybe it's
I
not
would,
true.
or
Maybe they are
let me put it
checking.
this way. I would doubt that's true. I would doubt. I mean, first of all, this is CNN, not the New York Times. I would like to see an example. I'm sure the New York Times has gotten a few things wrong, but they have a really good reputation for not getting things wrong.
Well, this is the problem with that, is that they'll they'll offer a redaction, I believe is what it's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they get
Or
something wrong,
retraction,
they'll
I think.
retraction,
Or there's
retraction.
you mean that when they're saying we got this fact wrong?
Right,
Yeah,
right. So they'll come out with that the next day. If something goes, hey, this wasn't right, or this number was wrong. The problem is that news has now been spread everywhere.
sure.
And how many people are actually paying attention to all the retractions?
Yeah, and
So
they
the
usually don't
initial
put it
wrong
front and
one,
center.
right? So the initial wrong one is the one that gets spread.
If it's good,
Now,
juicy.
if it's juicy and fear inducing and
Yeah.
panic inducing, it's probably spread by then. And you could make the case that the damage is already done. That a lot of people have already made up their mind about whatever that article was about, whether it was wrong or right, and aren't going to change their mind now that the retraction comes out,
Mm-hmm.
or even see the retraction. So you've got a real issue with the legitimate sources versus the unlegitimate sources, or the illegitimate sources. And I think that at the core is what people should be looking at and should be questioning that.
What do you
And
think people should do about that?
well, and I think that's where these alternative news channels that are deemed non-mainstream and thus susceptible to more scrutiny by the general public, because it's not coming through the main airwaves, it's coming through these sort of subsidiary pathways. Um, it's easy to dismiss them, and I don't think that we should so easily dismiss them. I'm not saying that we should take every non mainstream source of news as more legitimate or less legitimate. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that I think that there is a potential to get your information from more than one source. And
for
I
sure.
know that you agree with me on that
Yeah,
wholeheartedly. And I think that isn't the case for a lot of people. A lot of, and you can see it almost in the leaning of Democratic and Republicans. You could almost say unequivocally that Fox News, the majority of their audience would consider themselves Republican, and the MSNBC, the majority of their audience would probably consider themselves Democratic or
yeah,
liberal.
for sure.
So you already have a bias on, or it's already biased. Then, like at that point, you know, they're going to cater to their audience. Um, so I think it's a good idea for people that mainly watch MSNBC and just say Fox News is a bunch of crazy conservative, like Trump lovers, to maybe broaden their horizons a little bit and start either doing a little more investigation into what's being told, and not just blindly accepting every single stat that comes their way.
Absolutely.
And and I mean, I think that the sheer panic and the sheer amount of fear right now is a direct result of people not doing that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Oh, there are some sources that go out of their way to be neither left nor right leaning. The Week magazine is a really good one. They'll take a major issue and they'll have basically what is the opinion of the Wall Street Journal, and then what's the opinion of New York Times on that same issue, and what's the opinion of, you know, USA Today on that same issue. And it's almost like they set it up like they're arguing with each other. But the good thing about that is that they're, you know, if you only heard the point of view of, say, MSNBC is saying it in such a way that they know their audience is going to appreciate it. They're coming from the angle and the values of their audience, and there are other factors involved. And a lot of people have a kind of overly simplistic view of issues. So you get, you know, they'll have an opinion about something, but it's all one-sided, and their information that they've gotten is all one-sided. But there's another side of that. Obviously, if it's a controversial issue, there's another side to that. And probably there's legitimate arguments on the other side, not just nonsense. You know, but if you don't get any of that information, then you think that then anybody that comes up with a, you know, a comment or something on the other side, they seem like complete idiots. But that's only because you don't know what they know, you know. And so the Week magazine is really good for that. There's a free newsletter that you can get email called The Flip Side, that literally gives you quotes from the left and the right about a single issue every day, or I think 5 days a week. There's another one, I think it's called Know Here, KNOWHERE, and they do the same thing. They'll give you the story, basically neutrally given the story, and then at the end they'll give you the left headline on that story and the right headline on that story. And that one's really interesting, the way, just the angle that they give you on this.
And that brings me to my second and third point is the headline. And I think it's I don't think you can really argue that we live in a click-based news cycle. And
Definitely.
so whatever headline is the catchiest, most clickbaitable is the one that they use. And I've even found myself doing this, where I see a headline that fits with my narrative and I share it before I even read it.
Yeah,
And
me
I've
too.
done that. I've done that and then gone to the article and realized it was an article from 2 years ago or something,
Yeah.
you know? And but the headline really starts talking about something that's really happening right now. And it's kind of confusing because, like, I actually did one yesterday where somebody shared a news article about Australia banning the 5G network by Huawei. I don't even know how to pronounce that company, but it's the cell phone company.
Oh, it starts with
Huawei.
an H?
Yeah, it's like Huawei.
Yeah.
Like
Chinese
that.
company.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's amazing, because I've been reading about all these, or I've been watching videos about this guy down in Australia. I think his channel is called The Crow House, and he's pretty outspoken, and you could probably lump him into the conspiracy theorist category. But he's very much an outspoken against 5G, and so I was like, wow, Australia actually did it, and I shared the article, and then I opened the article and realized it was from 2 years ago. So I immediately took it down. I deleted it off my Facebook page. But that happens, I think, to more people than we realize.
For sure. And a
The
lot of people
sharing of
don't read those
information.
articles and don't even know that, so they're taking it the same way that you did, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've
Yeah, I've
gotten
done
to
it
that
before,
point.
and I've had the embarrassment of people putting in the comment that's 2 years ago, or, you know, that, you know, that was, they read the article and I hadn't, and you know, and then you have egg on your face. You're like, oh, how embarrassing is that?
But that gives me hope, right? In a way, that's like kind of the army of fact checkers. Like I want to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And as much as
Oh,
I think that
absolutely.
these news channels should want to be held accountable, but I don't know, because of their need to basically either promote a certain narrative, and also for their own survival as far as money. I don't know that are taking the needing to be completely honest and fact checked as seriously as some people that are just the average consumer. Like I have, I don't know, I have maybe 1,000 Facebook friends, and I admire it when somebody points out something wrong with something that I posted. I'm like, oh, thank you for pointing that out. I missed it or I fucked up.
Yeah.
Um, and the problem is when it happens, when that same scenario happens with, say, a mainstream media article, when they're like, hey, you just blasted to 60 million people across the world because you're a major news source and it's wrong. And then they do offer the retraction on the back of their newspaper or something, or at the bottom of their page. Does it matter if they even retracted at that
Well,
point?
I think it does matter in the long run, because they become known, like CNN is actually, I've seen a lot of people criticize them for their, jumping the gun on their stories and getting things wrong. You know, I haven't heard I mean, I'm sure that New York Times has done that, Wall Street Journal has done that, but not nearly as much. And so they're more trusted. And all of these, of course, are going to make mistakes. But in a way, the whole media, uh, as a whole, is sort of peer reviewed. I mean,
Hmm.
people will, if somebody gets something wrong in CNN, a bunch of people will write about it, including the other newspapers, because they're in competition with these guys, right? They'd be glad to point out something that
Right.
CNN did wrong. And so they get the same feedback just like we do. If we post something wrong on our Facebook page and somebody tells us about it, they're getting the same kind of feedback. But here's the thing, there's another side of this. One is a reputation in general, in the general population, for your trustworthiness. The other is your loyalty, the your loyal readers that like the point of view that you're presenting, that like even if you get it wrong, they still like it. you know because you know what I mean, because that's
Yeah.
because you're singing my song, you're saying what I want said in the world. And so uh that's another kind, I mean, you would think most people want newspapers that are telling the truth, right? That would be one of the things that they
Mm.
like about a newspaper or a news source, but but there's something else that people get out of that news source, and that's the you know comforting news from your point of view that you agree with, which
It's
is
a confirmation of your worldview, right?
right. Yeah. So that's it's like another thing, a different thing that you get out of a news source besides news. you know.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect segue into why conspiracy theories are so prevalent now. Is I think that there is a general distrust in these sources because they have made mistakes and repeatedly have made mistakes. They might be doing the best they can, but they've made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is infallible. We're all human.
Right.
But I think that there's a growing sense that we are being purposely misled. And I think that's what's given rise to so many conspiracy theories, because I think that there's a general feeling that we're not getting the truth. And it's not just from these articles that are proven to be inaccurate. We're starting to question the ones that aren't retracted. We're starting to question the ones that are claiming to be truth. So once you've sowed that seed of doubt to the point where you can no longer trust, I think the reasoning behind conspiracy theories is that, well, if they're not telling the truth, maybe it is completely on the other side. And so you sort of you swing the pendulum so far to the extreme that you start believing the earth is flat, and you start believing in the cabal, and you start
It's
believing in
all a
these.
lie.
Well, if the doubt is heavy enough, and I think it is getting to the point where um I don't know that a lot of people trust very much. in general, and it can be extrapolated on not just the news. I mean, I think that trust in general, from being sold things constantly, um, and I found this in just learning marketing and advertising, that the level of your average consumer of trust is at an all-time low, basically. um, that people question things. And I was talking to my friend Colin, who was selling solar power for a little while, and he would meet with people about solar, and he would explain to them all the benefits of solar and how it would save them tons of money in the long run. And people wouldn't be interested. It would almost be like, no, that can't be true, kind of thing. It's like, that's
Mm-hmm.
too good to be true. That
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't possibly spend $40,000 on a solar panel roof for my house, and in 5 years, it's literally making me money. No, I can't believe that. And he was running into that wall of doubt for something that was legitimately in their favor.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big, overwhelming problem in our society, is that I think our level of trust in a lot of things, not just the media, is at an all-time low.
I think maybe it's a problem, and it's also a good thing. I was just I saw a picture of this. It was like how they used to sell medicines in a little jar, and you drink this medicine, and it makes you feel better. And this is a medicine from, I think it was from the 1800s, and it contained cannabis, heroin, cocaine, and alcohol, and it
All the good stuff.
and it made people feel better. you know
No
so
shit.
maybe people were more trusting then. I don't know if that's really changed. I mean, it may have. It's possible that it may have. I'm sure somebody has done a study on this, um
Well,
but
cigarettes, right? Cigarettes were touted as healthy for a long time.
yeah,
Doctors would recommend Camels over Marlboros, and
I don't know
and
if
that
everybody believed
started
them
to
though.
shift.
I mean, I know that there's
Mm,
always been salesmen trying to sell things, but I don't know if people are less trusting now um, than they used to be, but maybe they are. It's possible. And if it is true, then it's in many ways that's a good thing. What I was just one of the I'm reading that book called Conspiracy Theories and the People Who Believe Them, and it's all each chapter is written by a different person, and they're expert in a different way on this topic. And one of them was he was talking about that in a function. I think he was a political scientist. And he was saying in a functioning democracy, you need you need a combination of trust and distrust. You need a certain amount of trust so that the machinery of the society can function. But you need a certain amount of distrust because there are people who will always try to take advantage of their positions of power, right? So you need a combination of those, but you can't go too far one way or the other. If you go too far on the trusting
yeah,
side, then you will be exploited, guaranteed, right? And if you go too far on the distrusting side, the society starts to fall apart, right? There's certain
right.
kinds of things you need to just there needs to be enough trust between people to be able to function as a democracy. Anyway, I thought that was interesting because I had never really thought about it uh, as being a balance, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. That there has to be a balance,
Yeah.
and
And that's the part, and I
I
think that's the part that conspiracy theories play. One of the parts that they play is to make people question the mainstream news that you're getting. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of it
absolutely.
is, of course, nonsense because they themselves are trying to make money and they themselves are producing. I'm talking about the conspiracy theorists themselves are trying to produce something that's going to get them attention and it's going to get them readers or watchers or whatever. So you can't trust them really any more than you can trust anybody else. But it is sometimes true that independent bloggers or people that make videos or whatever have broken stories that the mainstream had been ignoring. It does happen. Not very often, but
Well,
it does happen. Okay, like I said, that is an excerpt from a longer conversation between Ben Wagner and myself, Adam Lee Kahn. We had that conversation on April 12th, 2020. You can look it up and watch and listen to the longer one if you'd like. This is Adam Lee Kahn on The Atom Bomb.